Hello, guys. This is Kay, and you're listening to Pod Rainbow Science. Thank you for turning this on. And into this episode, I'm gonna talk about Evelyn Hooker, one of the most important researcher in the case of LGBTQ research, in the case of human rights and the gay rights movement. And I hope you're gonna enjoy it. Let's go! Hello, once again. Before we get to the main topic of this episode, I gotta give you a quick update from my life. And on YouTube, it's called story time, I guess. So this is my story time. I finally got my schedule in my work, so I'll be giving lectures on qualitative research methods, which are, to be honest, my least favorite research methods, but on the contrary, I'll be giving lectures on factor analysis, and that's cool. So, like factor analysis, I could do only factor analysis, to be honest, because it's easy and, people like it. So keep your fingers crossed for me to not make the students want to kill themselves, because they are students of public health and health related fields, so I guess statistics and research methods are not their biggest passion. Also, I came across something very new to me, that is being at work. I mean, like actually being at work, physically being there. I mean, of course, I worked in many research projects and I worked in other research institutions and universities, but nobody ever expected me to be physically at work. Because obviously, working as a researcher requires sitting in front of the screen, and it doesn't really matter where you sit. And here, I am expected to be in the office. And I still don't understand why, because, why? Which is, a little funny, or dumb, or I don't know yet. Well, anyway, in today's episode, I'm gonna tell you about someone renowned among LGBTQ researcher, but I'm not sure if she's so popular among people from the rainbow community. But let's start from the very beginning. Since the early 70s, psychologists and psychiatrists more or less agree that homosexuality or bisexuality is equally normal as heterosexuality. And I'm saying more or less because still some mental health specialists claim that homosexuality can be cured, and what's more, it should be cured. And those people sometimes even show their faces on TV. Not that they comment on Facebook or anonymously post things on Twitter. No, they do participate in TV shows and share those crazy ideas. And since they are immune to evidence-based science and objective knowledge, the only thing you can do is just looking at them with disdain-like expression on your face and nothing else. But coming back, even though there is a general agreement on that homosexuality and bisexuality are perfectly normal as well as heterosexuality, still some differences in terms of mental and physical health are present in favor of the straight people. And 50 years ago, we would probably hear that sexual orientation explains it, and it's because straight people are healthy and non-straight people are sick, and that accounts for those differences. And now we know it's far from being true, but there was someone who knew it long before us. Evelyn Hooker. Evelyn Hooker, born in 1907, was a psychologist, a very talented and very dedicated one. She got great reviews for her work as a teacher. She got great reviews for her work as a researcher. So she could apply for grants and scholarships in the US and Europe. And in the late 30s, she received a fellowship to the Berlin Institute of Psychotherapy. And during her stay in Berlin, she lived with a Jewish family. Since it was late 30s, she had a chance to observe how Adolf Hitler came to power. She observed how, step by step, the rights and freedom had been taken from minority groups. And sometime later, she found out that the family she was living with was killed in the concentration camp. Discrimination toward people she witnessed while her stay in Europe shaped her attitude toward minorities and ignited her will to help to overcome social injustice with her scientific work. Well, she didn't have to wait long. In 1944, when Hooker was teaching psychology class, a young man named Sam came up to her and said that he was gay. He was gay like many of his friends. And Evelyn Hooker knew that Sam had an agile mind, so she quickly became friends with him and his friends also. And one day Sam challenged her to study people like him. And by saying people like him, Sam meant the gay man. She didn't accept his challenge immediately, but without a doubt, she knew that it would not be easy to conduct such research or even propose such hypotheses. However, Evelyn Hooker remembered racial and ethnic injustice, religion discrimination she observed during her travel, and gender discrimination she experienced herself during her professional career, which was so common at the universities at the time when she was working. Over the course of next years, Evelyn Hooker became a respected professional, and in the meantime, she maintained her friendship with a group of homosexual men. They were speaking often. She gathered data on their lives, their friendship, their education, passion. But the data wasn't gathered with the scientific rigor, so it couldn't be officially used in publication. Therefore, Hooker decided to apply for NIMH grant. NIMH stands for National Institute of Mental Health. And it was honestly very unlikely that she would receive this grant. I would even say it was close to being impossible. Remember that we are talking about the time when McCarthy was very active. And I don't want to talk too much about McCarthy. Maybe there will be another occasion to talk about him. But to give you a brief overview, I'll just tell you that McCarthy was notorious for making accusations of treason related to communism at that time. I mean, like 40s and 50s in America. And at that time, fear of Soviet Union and socialist influence was widespread. And many conservative politicians referred to progressive reforms as communist. And that progressive reforms were, for instance, women's rights or child labor laws. And to put it in a nutshell, when you have a society living under such pressure, people are living in fear, and their fear is enhanced by people in the position of power like politicians, scientists, journalists. Successful implementation of other sources of fear is easier than ever. People living in fear are prone to misinformation, and whatever is said by an authority, it is likely to be considered as something very true. That is why lawyers and politicians evoking moral panic, describing homosexuality as a threat to social stability, and telling that homosexual people are contagious to other citizens must have been believed. And when they also said that homosexual persons are obviously morally flawed people, were more susceptible to being manipulated by Soviet spies, for example, they made a history complete. It was clear that solid, fair, and country-loving citizen had to be wary of such sexual perverts. So that it doesn't surprise us that no one foresaw the success for Hooker to receive the national grant that would enable her to conduct research on homosexual men. But for some reason, Evelyn Hooker's research idea intrigued John Eberhard so much that he personally came to the University of California to meet her and ask her to say something more about the project. John Eberhard was the head of the grants division, and somehow Evelyn enchanted him with her charm and intelligence, and she was so convincing that and confident that the project made sense that Eberhard finally, at the end of his stay in California, said that his division would give her this grant. But he also claimed that he wasn't sure if she would ever be able to really get this grant due to bureaucrats who might try to block it. But finally, thanks to many people along the way, she got the grant and she could finally start her research. Obviously, she was well known in the gay community, so she had no problem with finding the research sample consisted of gay men with no heterosexual history, which meant that she was looking for exclusively homosexual men who had no history of psychopathology and were not in psychotherapy at the time of the study. Was this sample a representative one? Of course it wasn't. Of course there could be some bias in this sample. And of course we could say that such research has lower validity than research on representative sample. Of course we could multiply drawbacks of a research. But at the time of virtually no research comparing homosexual and heterosexual men from society, because previous research usually compared homosexual men from psychiatric wards with heterosexual men randomly picked from population, her study was something acceptable. Another problem she came across was the problem with heterosexual sample. Obviously, her study immediately became the talk of the town, and since people knew that she was conducting research on gay men, heterosexual men weren't very likely to show up in her office. Because no straight man wanted to be accused of being gay. And Hooker was aware of this. She knew that she would have serious problem with convincing straight men, especially straight students from UCLA, to participate in this study. So she had to find another way to get them. She knew that her university office was exposed to other people's side, but she had a garden study where participants' privacy could be easily ensured. Also, she decided to decline every proposition from other researchers who wanted to co-investigate in order to prevent study participants from revealing their test results. She was also worried that some kind of McCarthy-like people could try to get an insight of her data. So she and her assistant were the only two people who had access to study data. The final sample consisted of 60 people. 30 of them were gay men, and 30 of them were straight men. She picked 3 research methods. All of them were qualitative methods. It was TAT, thematic perception test, the Rorschach inkblot test, and MAPS, make a picture story. They are all qualitative, and all so-called projective tests. It means that they were designed to elicit projected feelings or thoughts or impressions from an ambiguous stimulus. The projective methods are nowadays widely criticized because of not being objective, prone to the researchers' social bias, and so on. But at the time of her study, all of those methods were commonly used, and Rorschach inkblot test was even used to diagnose homosexuality. That's why, from her perspective, choosing those methods were justified. To give you a quick overview of those methods, I'm going to explain it in a few words. The TAT, thematic perception test, to put it in the easiest way, was a series of roughly 30 cards. Not all of them must be used. Usually psychologists use 7 or 8 or up to 12 cards with pictures including men, women, children, situations, and scenes. And I would say it looks like screenshots from the real life. In one picture, a woman looks like she's saying something to the child. In another picture, you can see a woman running. One other picture is a woodcut from Lindward. If you don't know Lindward, look it up. He's a really great artist. Variety of pictures, and your job is to say or write what has led up to the event, what is going on in the picture, what are those people thinking or feeling, and what's the outcome. So more or less, you have to make up the story based on the picture you see. And next, a therapist or a counselor reads the stories and see the general picture of your thoughts, like the general pattern. Like whether they are optimistic or you paint a depressive picture of everything. The next one, maps. They make a picture story test. It is very similar to the TAT. However, it consists, I believe, about 70 cards, or maybe just a little less than 70, with men, women, children, scenes, animals, figures with blank faces, members of minority groups, and so on. And you are instructed to describe what happened, what are the thoughts and feelings of the characters in the picture, what's going to happen next. So it's almost exactly the same thing as in TET. And next, a therapist asks a series of questions, for example, with which of the character you identified the most and why. And the final step is to combine it all together and see if any pattern becomes visible from all the stories you told or wrote. And the final method was the Rorschach inkblot test, which is feasibly the most popular projective method, and I'm sure you all know it very well. Numerous versions of this test can be found online. It was created in 1921 by Hermann Rorschach. Rorschach, as a child, liked to play a game called Klexography, which involved creating inkblots, and in German, Klex means inkblots, and making up stories or poems based on how they looked. It seems like a great way to increase creativity in children, but not so promising when it comes to diagnosing patients. However, Rorschach observed that patients with schizophrenia described the inkblots differently than other patients. What made him wonder if those inkblots could be used as a diagnostic measure. He even created a systematic approach to use this method, and there are about 10, or not about, I guess it's 10 inkblots in the official version. 3 or 4 are multicolored and 7 are black and gray. The shapes are absolutely abstract, and the therapist asks you just one question, which is what this could be. And you should describe what you see. So some people could say they see, I don't know, fighting people. Others would say there are animals or insects. Another person can say that there is a hand holding a candle or anything like that. And the examiner further analyzes whether you see a whole human body, part of human body, a detail, an animal, a part of nature like water or leaves or anything. They can also analyze whether your description was related to movement, color, or size or shape, and so on. And as every projective method, those 3 are widely criticized for not being standardized. It means that they don't have the objective rules or of formal scoring, so they cannot be scientifically assessed as valid or reliable. They are sensitive to personal features of psychologists who scores them, so they may, to some extent at least, reflect the therapist's projected feelings instead of patient's feelings. That's why projective methods are in general declined, or they are not used so often anymore. However, in private practice, therapists can use them to get a general idea of, for example, feeling of a patient. For instance, when a person's description are pivoting around optimistic events, and characters in the pictures are described as happy or something nice is going to happen to them, and the patient is convincing us that they are in great depression, we should be alerted. We should dig deeper to see what's going on with the person. But as I'm telling you, it can never be the only method used to diagnose people, and it can never be used as only a method to say something about a patient. It can be used only as an additional measuring tool. And to be honest, they shouldn't even be called tests, because they should be called methods, because telling that something is a test or a questionnaire, it indicates that that is reliable and valid, and those methods are not. So okay, coming back to from this prolonged description of projective methods, let's see what's up with our friend Evelyn and her case. Of course, besides those three methods, she interviewed study participants. She asked them about the most important demographic information, the relationship history, and other things that were important from her perspective. And when she finally gathered all the information and results from those 60 people, she combined the results in pairs. She matched one homosexual man and one heterosexual man completely randomly. She put it all together and sent it to the three greatest experts in their field. She sent it to Bruno Klopfer, an expert on Rorschach inkblot tests. He was of world renown. She sent it to Edwin Schneidman, the creator of MAPS method, and she also sent it to Dr. Mortimer Mayer. Those three gentlemen received the research data from Evelyn Hooker, who asked two questions. Question 1 was, in each pair, which member is the better adjusted? And question 2 was, in each pair, which member is homosexual? And guess what? None of the three experts was able to distinguish homosexual from heterosexual men in terms of their results. None of them. Also, they all agreed that in each pair, both men are equally well adjusted. There was no differences. There was no single difference between those groups. Contrary to the general opinion, three greatest world experts could not find any difference between gay and straight men. In 1955, Evelyn Hooker packed her bags and flew to Chicago to present her results at the American Psychological Association's convent. And the results she presented had profound impact on people. Researchers from the National Institute of Mental Health were so impressed that they decided to award her with another grant to enable her to continue her research. And in 1967, Evelyn Hooker became the chair of National Institute of Mental Health Task Force on Homosexuality. And thanks to her work, not only her, but her work was instrumental in this case. In 1973, American Psychiatric Association decided to remove homosexuality from the handbook of disorders, and psychiatrists and therapists began to undermine the sense of behavioral conversion therapies. It took some time, it took long years, but since she first mentioned her results, something started to change. In 1991, 5 years before she passed away, American Psychiatric Association presented Evelyn Hooker with an award for distinguished contribution to psychology in the public interest. Embracing her courageous work, perseverance, and belief in social equality, which led to human rights revolution and development of a new approach to research on human sexuality. And Evelyn Hooker died in 1996. at her home in Santa Monica at the age of 89. And even though her groundbreaking research was the subject of criticism, her sample recruitment as well as the use of projective methods could be criticized. Also, the number of experts she picked could be criticized. But her impact on lives of so many gays, lesbians, and bisexual people lets us remember her as one of the most important researchers of the 20th century. And nowadays, little different methods are used to measure the health discrepancy between LGBTQ persons and straight ones, and the scientific world has come a long way. But I honestly don't want this episode to last like 5 hours, so I'm gonna tell you about it in the next episode. And now I want to thank you for listening in, and hope you're gonna remember about Evelyn Hooker research and her contribution to the sexual rights movement. So now, thank you for today. Take care, have a nice evening or day or night. I don't know when you're listening. And until next time, bye.